And you know what? It would be a chance to share a lot of these stories and feelings and the uniqueness of our...
For more than 5 decades, Ron Howard represented something rarely seen in Hollywood: consistency. The child actor who never spiraled, the teen star who never rebelled, the young filmmaker who never faded away. In an industry built on scandals, collapses, and comebacks, Ron appeared to walk a straight and quietly remarkable line. His smile seemed permanent, his reputation spotless, his success almost effortless. But newly surfaced details, revealed only moments ago, have peeled back the curtain on a life that was far more complicated than his public image suggested. For the first time, Ron Howard has spoken openly about the hidden sacrifice, the family turmoil, and the unspoken consequences that followed him from childhood into adulthood. He has admitted the private choice he made in the early 1990s that he still calls the hardest decision of his life, and the relative he nearly lost to addiction. While cameras continued rolling, award ceremonies continued celebrating, and headlines assumed everything was perfect. To understand the weight of his confession now, one must understand the world that shaped him from birth. Ron Howard's entry into life was neither ordinary nor accidental. Ronald William Howard was born March 1, 1954, in Duncan, Oklahoma. But his life was already pointed toward the direction of the entertainment world before he ever took his first breath. He was not born into Hollywood, but he was born into people who dreamed in Hollywood's language. His father, born Harold Rance Beckenholt, adopted Rance Howard as his professional name in 1948, 3 years before Ron was born. He served in the United States Air Force, but the uniform never removed the performer inside him. His mother, Jean Spiegel, had trained as an actress in New York, carrying ambitions of her own long before marriage and children settled around her life. Ron grew up in a home where scenes were analyzed at dinner, where timing and delivery were as important as chores and curfews. Script pages rested near salt shakers, and conversations often concluded with the question, "How would you play it?" From the outside, this sounded enchanting. Creative parents fostering creative children, but the truth was much more demanding. The Howard family was not wealthy. They were not famous. They were not guaranteed anything. Their pursuit was not glamour. It was survival through storytelling. Rance didn't dream of billboards. He dreamed of consistent roles. Jean didn't rehearse to chase red carpets. She rehearsed so she wouldn't step away from what she loved. Before Ron learned to form complete sentences, he was already performing them. At only 18 months old, he made his on-screen debut in the 1956 Western Frontier Woman. By all measures, he was far too young to understand what a camera was, yet his life was being shaped by it. While toddlers his age learned peekaboo, Ron learned where to look, where to stand, and how to react when a stranger with a microphone leaned toward him. The idea of choice, the idea of asking a child if they wanted the spotlight, never existed in his era. This was the 1950s, when child performers were expected to adapt, not negotiate. Acting was a family endeavor, and everything the Howards earned remained under their roof, managed not by studios nor agents, but by parents who understood the unpredictable survival game that was television. The shift that changed everything came when the television industry began migrating westward. Los Angeles was fast becoming the electric center of the screen world. If you wanted steady work, you had to be near it. So the Howards made the most consequential decision of their young family. They packed the car, left Oklahoma behind, and headed for California. Not because they were chasing a dream, but because they were following the work. Ron was only a toddler when he arrived in California, but the move positioned him closer to writers, producers, directors, and opportunity than any classroom or theater workshop ever could. Before most children are enrolled in preschool, Ron was being considered for speaking roles. Before he ever lined up for recess, He had his name in television credits. For the Howard family, acting wasn't weekend play, it was employment. His father took every role he could find, appearing in more than 140 film productions and nearly 200 television episodes throughout his career. Not in pursuit of fame, but to serve the stability of his family. He worked so Ron could work. Their lives became a system, supporting one another through the unpredictable rhythm of freelance art. Then came the date that etched Ron Howard into American memory, October 3rd, 1960. Ron was only 6 years old when he stepped into the role of Opie Taylor on The Andy Griffith Show. It wasn't just another audition. It wasn't just another job. It was lightning in a bottle. From the moment the theme song whistled across living rooms nationwide, audiences connected with the boy from Mayberry. On the surface, Ron was simply a child actor performing lines written for him. But behind the scenes, something unique was happening. Ron's father was not a distant supervisor. He was an active guardian of performance and authenticity. After an early script reading, Rance approached the production team, not as a stage parrot demanding attention, but as a collaborator with insight. He believed the father-son dynamic did not feel genuine. He understood the emotional weight those scenes needed. When Andy Griffith listened and agreed, the soul of the show shifted. The bond between Andy and Opie began mirroring the bond between Rance and Ron. It was a handshake that defined the emotional language of one of the most beloved shows of its time. Ron carried a workload that would overwhelm many adults. Memorizing scenes, filming long days, attending interviews, rehearsing reactions that felt spontaneous to viewers, but were carefully crafted through training. Yet the Howards operated with rules. There were no outside guardians, no managers controlling the finances, no parental chaos often associated with child performers. They were disciplined, budgeted, structured. Behind the scenes, their life remained startlingly simple. They shared regular dinners, meatloaf, fish sticks, affordable staples, because the entertainment industry never guaranteed a tomorrow. Television work could evaporate as quickly as it arrived. Ron attended public schools in Burbank, Robert Louis Stevenson Elementary, followed by local junior and high schools. On paper, this sounded normal, but his day-to-day existence rarely aligned with the children around him. When he wasn't memorizing lines, he was rehearsing. When his classmates prepared for weekend sleepovers, Ron prepared for Monday call times. He played community sports, not as a carefree kid, but as someone carving out moments of normalcy between obligations. Meanwhile, his younger brother Clint also entered the industry, beginning a career that spanned more than 200 acting credits. They were family in the home, co-workers on set, learning early that their childhood existed in carefully managed fragments. Ron Howard's acting style did not come from childlike impulse. It came from calculation. Rance taught him how to act truthfully. He taught him how to pause, how to listen, how to respond like a real person, not like a performer trying to impress. Producers noticed. One described Ron not as a cute child actor, but as a truthful one. The camera rewarded truth, and audiences felt it. As his popularity grew, so did his earnings. He went from modest per-episode pay to a level comfortable enough to change his family's circumstance, a situation that placed enormous responsibility on a child who had yet to lose all his baby teeth. Fame brought attention. Autographs became interruptions in grocery stores. Smiles became expectations. Even as a child, people assumed they knew him because they recognized his face. Yet, as Ron would reveal decades later, while his face was familiar, his childhood was quietly slipping away. One moment in particular defined his early emotional maturity. It occurred during the filming of an episode involving loss, an episode that required Ron to display deep grief with no dramatic exaggeration. He didn't perform the scene as a child pretending. He simply allowed his breath to slow, his eyes to blink against tears, his voice to tremble with restraint. The director barely called for second takes. The adults on set watched in silence. He was 9 years old, but his emotional performance carried the weight of someone decades older. Ron later shared that he used substitution, a professional technique typically reserved for much older actors. If a scene called for sadness, he would recall something real that hurt. But unlike adults, he did not yet understand where to place those emotions once the camera cut. He learned to bury them quietly, then move on to the next scene. Documentaries often highlight the successes of child actors, but rarely do they illuminate the isolation. Ron described these years as a golden cage, beautiful from the outside, restrictive from within. The California state law required 3 hours of schooling on set and no more than 8 hours total on production days. A welfare worker monitored the requirements, but that technical compliance did little to replicate the experience of childhood. His schoolroom was a small instructional space near the production stages. He learned multiplication tables while grips rolled equipment past the door. He practiced spelling as sound technicians adjusted microphones. At lunchtime, instead of joining a cafeteria full of peers, he ate near his father or members of the crew. Andy Griffith sometimes played guitar to lighten the atmosphere. Don Knotts shared jokes that were carefully clean. These moments became his equivalent of playground laughter. This was his world, warm, safe, but sectioned away from people his age. Years later, long after replacing acting marks with director's chairs, and long after exchanging his on-screen expressions for behind-the-camera vision, Ron Howard would admit that he lived a childhood admired by millions, but shared with very few. And as he reveals today, just moments ago, behind that image of stability, there were devastating decisions, personal losses, and private battles the public never saw. As Ron Howard transitioned out of childhood roles and into adolescence, Hollywood paused with curiosity. The industry was filled with young actors who shined brightly as children and then vanished. The transition into adulthood had claimed many careers, yet Ron navigated it steadily and without spectacle. By his late teens, Ron took on the familiar role of Richie Cunningham in Happy Days, another series that captured American audiences. A wholesome character cemented his image, reliable, clean-cut, unthreatening, and timeless. Viewers associated him not merely with roles, but with a manner of life. He appeared to be growing up exactly as the industry once hoped every young star would. But privately, Ron began considering a shift. He respected acting, valued its challenges, but directing sparked something deeper. When he observed sets, he watched more than performance. He studied structure. He paid attention to how scenes were shaped, how lighting influenced emotion, how editing changed meaning. Unlike many actors, he did not see the camera as an interruption. He saw it as an opportunity to transform perspective. Yet the path from beloved actor to respected director was not simple. Transitioning roles within the industry confronts skepticism. Many actors never earn the credibility to lead behind the camera. But Ron approached directing the same way his father had taught him to approach performance, with preparation, not entitlement. He began reading everything he could about filmmaking, cinematography, editing techniques, narrative construction. He asked questions without hesitation, embracing mentorship rather than defensiveness. While performing in scripted comedies on screen, he absorbed the structure of drama and suspense off-screen. He listened more than he spoke. Ron directed a short film while attending the University of Southern California. It was not widely distributed, but it was widely noticed by the right people. His directorial voice, subtle, character-focused, patient, was forming. When he directed Grand Theft Auto in 1977, he proved that his work could attract audiences, not because of his former fame, but because of his growing skill. Over the next decade, Howard developed his directorial identity through both television and film. Each project sharpened a different aspect of his creative instinct. He focused on stories driven by relationships more than spectacle, on ordinary people in extraordinary situations. He valued sincerity over shock. The industry began to recognize that Ron Howard was not borrowing a directing career, he was building one. However, while the public narrative centered on success, the private reality was more complex. Fame often exists on a straight line for observers, but rarely for those experiencing it. As his reputation behind the camera grew, more opportunities arrived, each larger than the last. But with opportunity came weight. Directing is not only artistic, it is managerial, financial, and psychological. Hundreds of people depend on decisions made by one individual. Ron pushed himself, committed to excellence, and refused to allow assumptions about former child stars to undermine his credibility. The work was not casual, it was constant, and with constant work came constant responsibility. As the years progressed, Howard would later admit that he rarely paused. Success allowed little room for reflection. Then came the early 1990s, a turning point in his public trajectory and a defining moment in his private life. During this period, Ron confronted a significant personal and professional crossroads, one that required him to choose between the momentum of his career and the stability of his family. The details, shared only recently, revealed that the decision shaped not only his future projects, but the emotional rhythm of his life. Ron had a family member facing a difficult struggle, one rooted not in public failure, but in private challenge. While Ron continued directing, attending award ceremonies, and participating in industry events, he was simultaneously standing beside someone he cared for deeply, someone fighting addiction. At the time, few outside his closest circle knew. Hollywood had trained him to protect privacy, and he did. While studio executives discussed budgets and scripts, Ron was navigating conversations with doctors, counselors, and moments of uncertainty. Addiction does not pause for schedules. Recovery does not align itself with production calendars. Yet Ron moved between these worlds without allowing them to collide publicly. The emotional burden was considerable. Being responsible for major productions while also supporting a loved one in crisis requires a strength that often goes unseen. Howard later explained, in measured, thoughtful reflection, that while success elevated his career, it also demanded a discipline that exceeded the spotlight. During one production period, Ron pushed himself harder than usual, determined to maintain balance between professional obligation and personal responsibility. He arrived early, stayed late, reviewed footage at home, and attempted to meet expectations on all fronts. But the combination of emotional strain and physical exhaustion eventually became unsustainable. On set, during a demanding production schedule, Ron experienced a moment where his body simply halted. It was not dramatic, not outwardly noticeable to all, but for Ron, it was the moment he understood the cost. He recognized that dedication could not replace rest, that strength required recovery, and that silence, not admission, had become his default response to pressure. This moment did not end his career. It did not create headlines. Few people on the production ever spoke of it, but internally, it marked a change. He reconsidered the pace at which he had been operating. He reflected on the personal boundaries he had allowed to dissolve. The decision he made shortly afterward, one he acknowledges still weighs on him, was to step back from a particular opportunity that many in the industry expected him to embrace. Turning down a project in Hollywood is rarely simple. Directors are often judged not only by what they achieve, but by what they reject. Yet Ron made his choice quietly, but decisively. He described the decision as painful, necessary, and unforgettable. While the public saw a director selecting one film over another, only Ron understood the reasons beneath the surface. As years passed, and his directorial filmography expanded, the balance renewed itself. He continued working, continued creating, continued leading. His work on films such as A Beautiful Mind, Apollo 13, and Cocoon earned acclaim not because of fame, but because of care. Care for story, character, and detail. His approach remained consistent. Quiet leadership, measured humility, and respect for those around him. The revelation of these private challenges does not rewrite Ron Howard's public success, it reframes it. His career did not unfold without consequence. His stability did not come without strain. His achievements were formed not solely by talent, but by the discipline learned as a child performing for cameras that never blinked. Ron Howard's story remains unique in Hollywood's landscape. He did not collapse under fame, but he was not untouched by it. He did not disappear after childhood roles, but he did not escape the complexity they created. His life did not follow the sensational arc of downfall and comeback, yet it carried its own quiet battles and difficult decisions. Today, audiences continue to admire Ron Howard not only for his long-standing contributions to film, but for the resilience behind them. His journey reflects the seldom discussed reality of success, the weight behind the recognition, the labor behind the smile, and the sacrifice behind the applause. In revealing these long-held details, Howard has offered something rare: perspective. He reminds viewers that visibility does not eliminate vulnerability, that achievement does not prevent struggle, and that even the most consistent careers contain chapters the public never reads. His legacy is not defined solely by childhood charm or adult accomplishment. It is defined by endurance, reflection, and the acknowledgement that private challenges often run parallel to public triumphs. Ron Howard remains, even today, a figure of remarkable continuity in a volatile industry. But now, perhaps for the first time, audiences understand not only the success, but the silent journey that shaped it.